You're listening to a podcast from the BBC World Service. This is Hard Talk with me, Zainab Badawi. Thanks for downloading this edition of the programme, and I hope you enjoy it. My guest is Sabrina de Sousa, an ex-CIA spy who faces extradition from Portugal to Italy to serve a prison sentence for her alleged role 13 years ago in a CIA extraordinary rendition case when an Egyptian terror suspect was kidnapped in Milan. She denies involvement. Last year, she visited Portugal against official advice and was detained by the authorities there. Has she been abandoned by the CIA, or is she the agent of her own misfortune? Sabrina de Sousa in Lisbon, welcome to Hard Talk. So you, along with more than 20 American officials, were found guilty in absentia in Italy because of your alleged involvement in this particular extraordinary rendition case. What exactly was your involvement?
Thank you, Zain. I've been fighting the charges against me for the last several years. I've been consistent in my message that I'd like to clear my name. So the charges against me actually have no evidence. And as you know, the entire trial took place in absentia. We were not served or informed of the charges against us. So
you are denying any involvement whatsoever in this extraordinary rendition case involving the Egyptian cleric known as Abu Umar?
That's exactly correct.
But on what basis can you say that when the Italian courts have found you, along with more than 20, guilty for his abduction off the streets in Milan, and the Italian judiciary is an independent one, it's a properly functioning court system there? They must have their reasons for finding you guilty.
Well, that goes back to what I'd said a little earlier, that this was a trial in absentia. We were not present there to defend ourselves against the charges. You see, this was 26 empty defense chairs. We weren't allowed to present any evidence. The evidence was covered by state secret in the US and state secrets in Italy. So I've never really had a chance to do that, to counter the charges against me. If you look at what my attorney has presented to the Office of the President as well, for the only option available to me right now, which is the pardon process, he clearly lays out each of the charges and how there is no evidence for any of them. When the abduction took place itself on the 17th of February, I was nowhere near Milan to begin with, so there was no direct involvement either in the kidnapping of Abu Omar.
But could you not have been involved in the planning?
That is also one of the charges against me, and I deny that as well, because the planning all took place in Rome. So here's what happened initially. 9/11 took place, and the U.S., under President Bush, ramped up the rendition program. All the chiefs of station around the world were asked to dialogue with their foreign counterparts, in this case in Italy, the Italian intelligence service, to find out if there was any way to work jointly in the rendition of targets who were deemed to be of high value or posed an imminent threat. So the Rome station chief, Jeffrey Castelli, talked to his counterpart, General Polari at the Italian intelligence, to find out if this was a possibility and that they would work jointly with us on this. Italian SISMI officials met with the CIA counterparts, since I was the only one who spoke both Italian and English. In January of 2002, I facilitated the translation between both teams to talk about the logistics of this possibility. And after that, I pretty much had no role in that because the entire operation was run out of Rome.
You must have known, as an employee of the CIA based in Italy, that this was the kind of thing that you'd signed up for.
No, this is absolutely not true. I signed up before 9/11, and you have to remember that the rendition detention interrogation program, which had started under Reagan and sort of ramped up a little more under President Clinton, actually took full form and really ramped up after 9/11 under President Bush. But it was highly compartmented. Very few people knew about it. And my only knowledge of it started when it was presented to the Italian intelligence organization. Also, it's a rendition, detention, interrogation program. So it's not possible for one officer to know all three parts of it, because all three parts of it are completely compartmented from each other. So I knew about the rendition bit, and also, sorry, not the entire program, except the part where I translated between the Italian intelligence and the group that came from Washington to find out about the logistics for it.
But are you saying, Sabrina de Sousa, are you saying that you had no idea that the cleric Abu Umar was going to be abducted in 2003? You had no knowledge whatsoever that that was in the offing?
Oh, no, I knew definitely I knew that was in the offing. And what we were told very specifically, which turned out not to be the case at the time, was that there was a dangerous cleric who posed an imminent danger. The Italians were doing nothing about it, and he needed to be taken off the streets in Milan, of Milan. And that's what was presented as justification to CIA headquarters. That, of course, turned out not to be the case, because once he was rendered to Egypt, the Egyptians released him after a year for lack of prosecutable evidence against him. So that was the narrative that everyone was told, including the Italians, who had to approve this rendition because Italy is a NATO country.
Yeah, but you say, yes, and you're right. I mean, he claims that he was tortured, electrocuted and so on when he went back, but then he was subsequently released by the Egyptians. However, an Italian court has sentenced Abu Umar to 6 years in prison for, and I quote, criminal association for the purposes of international terrorism. So Egypt may think he's got nothing to answer for, but Italy thinks he does.
And he was tried in absentia, so was he able to defend these charges against him?
Yeah, but I was just making the counterpoint to you. You said that this was a man who shouldn't have been the victim of extraordinary rendition because he was released by the Egyptian authorities, and I'm simply putting it to you that actually he was found guilty in absentia by an Italian court for criminal association for the purposes of international terrorism. So, I mean...
Right, but that didn't fit the threshold for him to be rendered, you see. He was already under investigation by the Italian police, and they had dropped investigation of him, according to Italian court documents, in January of 2003, a couple months before the rendition. So they didn't consider him an imminent danger.
All right. We're not going to try Abu Umar here again, but I want to ask you, because in 2003, when all this happened, and as you know, the climate changed very much after September the 11th, because you're making your opposition to rendition very, very clear now. But why didn't you perhaps resign from the CIA earlier? I just give you one example of what was being said by the Bush administration at the time. The Vice President Dick Cheney said 5 days after the September 11th attacks that the government would need to work through the dark side. It's going to be vital for us to use any means at our disposal, basically, to achieve our objectives. A lot of what needs to be done quietly. That was the administration that you were serving in the CIA.
Correct. But so, again, we did not have all the facts with us, and especially for someone like myself, who was a junior officer in Milan, all I was told, and again, we were working side by side with the Italians on counterterrorism operations, and all we were told at the time, which turned out not to be the case, was Abu Omar was a dangerous terrorist.
Are you saying that you oppose the rendition programs, which of course are highly controversial, and many countries in the West and you know, in the wider world say that they are not an acceptable way of fighting the war on terror? I mean, it's basically when a terror suspect is abducted and taken to a third country where they may not enjoy, well, they won't enjoy the kind of protections and human rights that America might generally be considered to give its own citizens. So, I mean, you are very opposed to these rendition programs.
I definitely got opposed to them as the years went by, and I saw that the narrative of these are essential tools that save lives and they're very useful turned out not to be the case. You see, because being on the inside, you're in a bubble, And this happened for years after I left Milan. And, you know, if you're told, like, okay, you know, this is what it is, and you don't see the metrics to prove that they are as useful as some officers say they are, then you leave, which I left in 2009, and it really didn't make a lot of sense to see that when you weigh the cost of the damage it's done to the image of the United States, and there's been no due process to all those who have been rendered to and now sitting in Guantanamo in a program that's where you catch them, they get tortured, and then you release them now without due process. It just has been totally counterproductive for us.
But you have written recently...
I mean, this was the only rendition.
Yeah, you've written recently to Pope Francis, and you said... Your Holiness, you've spoken decisively about rendition, detention, interrogation programs. We need your voice now more than ever to keep this issue at the forefront for much-needed discourse in the court of public opinion. But the Obama administration does not support extraordinary rendition programs, nor does he support the enhanced interrogation techniques which led to the waterboarding, which received so much attention. So what kind of public debate do you want now? This has all been condemned by the current administration.
It has been condemned by the current administration, but it's not. But again, we have presidential candidates who say they will bring it back.
So, but
as in Donald Trump.
Yeah. So you want that? So what's the public opinion debate that you want? You want to say America never revert to using these techniques in the war against terror?
I think the public debate has to be when there's more information and more transparency about the programs. That's what the Senate Torture Report is all about, and that's what they're fighting to do, to release parts of it so we can have this debate. The other issue, I think, for everybody is the lack of accountability that continues to dog the U.S. administration, because no one's ever been held accountable in the United States. Now, there are cases that have been opened, for example, in Berlin, focusing on specific officials who had made a decision, for example, in the Khalid al-Masri case, that rendition. All the cases that were brought on his behalf were dismissed because of state secrets. Finally, now, the European Center for Constitution and Human Rights has brought a case against a specific individual. So we have to have some accountability, and we have to examine what has been done so that it doesn't, so there's a, so the public knows, the same ones who want.
We've had a lot of reports, I mean, and investigations. I mean, notably, in 2014, the Senate Intelligence Committee report on CIA torture brought in by the Democrats condemned all these kind of things that are going on. You make it sound as though these things are going on unchallenged, and that, you know, nobody says that they are a very, very distasteful way of conducting affairs. So I'm just really struggling to see what more you feel your voice is bringing to this debate.
I think the issue of state secrets and that they impede real investigations. There are numerous investigations that still need to take place. I'm looking at my own Abu Omar case, where I believe there has to be real investigations into this, because there has been no accountability for those who provided the justification for this ill-conceived and unnecessary rendition, or those who authorized it. That's what I'm talking about.
Just looking at your own predicament now, because there you are, I'm talking to you in Lisbon, in the capital of Portugal, and you had travelled there against official advice from the United States. The CIA and the State Department advised you not to travel outside the US when the case was proceeding in Italy in 2009, and then when the Italians issued the arrest warrant for you, which, by the way, has been upheld, hasn't it, you were told not to leave the United States. Why didn't you comply?
So I left the so number one, I had to resign, so I could leave the United States except come to Europe, because you see, most of my family live abroad. They live in Europe, my mother lives in India, and everywhere else in the world. What happened was in 2014, I found out that I was excluded from the list of pardons that was sent over to the Italian president's office. That meant I would never, ever be able to visit my family in Portugal. I was born a Portuguese citizen. Most of my family is over here as well. And I just decided this needed to be dealt with head on. And yes, I took the risk to do this. And it's just something that needs to be done, because, you know, this is where the accountability comes in. I'm being held accountable for decisions made by others for which I had absolutely no control over or input into this rendition.
Why did you,
So
why, you say that you had to travel to see your family, but why do you think when you asked for your family members, your mother in particular, to be allowed to come to the United States to see you, why was that not approved? She wasn't given a visa, you also wanted her funding covered.
Well, it was funding covered because she needed to be escorted, number one, to Bombay to get her visa back again, to the States and back again. And I'd asked in July for her to come for Christmas, and in January the following year they refused, saying they didn't want to set a precedent for funding her to come to the US.
But is it not the fact, Sabrina de Sousa, that as Paul McGrath from the University of Birmingham here in England says, the fact that you effectively wanted to force Washington's hand by travelling to Europe to clear your name. You're kind of upping the ante. It might be seen by the US authorities as a deliberate provocation on your part.
Possibly, but again, being left off the pardons and being punished for speaking out all these years, again, wasn't, you know, something that I felt that I should have to put up with for the rest of my life, because this meant the rest of my life. Being excluded from the pardon meant I would never get a pardon, and the arrest warrant would remain into effect, and I would never see this part of my family again.
When you asked why you weren't given a pardon, what was the answer that you were given?
No, I found out about this. My attorney in Italy sent me a note in 2014 saying, by the way, do you know that the US has asked for pardons for a group of officers and you've been excluded from that list? Do you know anything about it? And I said no, and then I made that a matter of record by writing a letter to the law firm in Italy handling the pardons. So there's no explanation for why I was left off the pardons. But again, to me, with family all over Europe and in India, it was really important that this issue get resolved. You've got to remember, too, that we were told in 2008, before the trial ended, that we were going to get convicted and that all of us would immediately get the pardon right after that.
Sure.
2013 came, one officer got a pardon. So my attorney went to the office of the president to ask why, when someone with worse charges than against him was given a pardon and I was not, what was going on with it. And they hadn't even looked at my file, which is exactly the pardon that is sponsored by the US, and that's what I need to find out, whether this option is not available to me anymore or not.
Do you think that perhaps you're seen as somebody who shouldn't really be addressing these kinds of issues in the public domain? Because you say, you know, you want to clear your name, you want the evidence to come out, but you know that a lot of the evidence pertaining to this case is going to come under national security and it can't be divulged, therefore. And I put to you what Scott Lucas from Birmingham University in the UK says of your case and the others who were convicted. I know of no other case in the CIA's history where officers were convicted by court in an allied country. Previous cases of CIA excesses on foreign soil would generally be handled by discreet contacts between diplomatic services. I mean, wouldn't it be better for you to do battle behind the scenes precisely for the reason that's just been laid out there?
I've spent about 8 years, I would say, doing exactly that. I exhausted every internal option in the CIA. Finally, by law, since I had exhausted all the options in the CIA, I went to the Congress of the United States. I have numerous letters written to the Congress of the United States, senators who chair the intelligence committees, asking them to please intercede in this case, primarily initially because I was worried about my family and the ability to see my parents. I worked this all the way till I finally decided that it had to be a matter, had to get into the public domain. You have to remember that this case did not have to take place. This was done just because of one person's ambition. Literally, I mean, this was an individual, Abu Omar, who had not even come to the attention of anyone in the rendition unit in the CIA, and they just wondered why he was being rendered in the first place. You see, so I did everything I could. I did every single thing I could quietly. I even offered to resign quietly if they gave me my pension, and I would go off and, you know, hope that they proceeded with the pardon like they had promised.
But essentially, you became a whistleblower, didn't you? Essentially, that's what you are now.
I can't. Well, I really don't like to call myself a whistleblower because I'm not blowing the whistle on the entire program since I'm not I just can't speak about it since I was not part of that program. But what I'm doing is defending myself against the charges against me. And again, when you talked about, your charges would require state secrets, mine don't. My attorney, Dario Bolognese, has made an excellent point on each of those charges against me, and they really don't require the divulging state secrets to counter them.
But now, here you are in Portugal. As I said, you decided to travel there, despite the fact that there was a Europol arrest warrant out for you, so you knew that you would be detained by the authorities. Do you think now that the Portuguese will extradite you to Italy?
I don't know what's going to happen right now because the extradition process seems to have stopped. Also, you need to know also that I came here in May of last year, and for all the way till October, no one asked for my extradition. My attorney from Italy came to visit me in Portugal, dialogued with the president's office in Italy. They knew I was over here. No one asked for the extradition. When I decided to go see my mother again and leave Portugal was when the Schengen information system kicked in. And that's when I was detained.
Yeah.
So again...
So you won't be extradited? Because we're all saying you're the ex-CIA spy who's going to go to Italy and spend 4 years in prison. But your own legal representative in Portugal, Manuel Magalhães de Silva, says Italy does not want the extradition to go ahead. They're trying to get the Portuguese courts to stop the extradition. He says the Italian government won't want to see the level of cooperation between them and the United States exposed. So you're not going to end up going to Italy, are you?
Well, okay, here's the other thing.
Briefly, if you would.
To go to Italy. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I volunteered to go to Italy when I first got to Portugal. I said, I'll go there, I'll meet with the, the officers in charge of their pardon, and we'll talk about these charges against me, and we can take care of it, sort it all out. I had volunteered to do that. There's no need for this long extradition process. In the meanwhile, that just keeps cropping up in the news.
All right. So do you feel that you've been abandoned by the US authorities?
Oh, I absolutely have been abandoned. And again, this is not something that should happen to federal employees at my level for decisions made much higher up and where there's been no accountability whatsoever. This is a classic case of totally being at the... And literally, I've had to fight this on my own because I've had no help from the US to do so. And furthermore, then I was excluded from the pardon system.
But very quickly,
you see?
Very quickly, are you not also to some extent an agent of your own misfortune?
I don't think so. I really would like to see this resolved. And there are ways of resolving it, and it should be resolved immediately without any further ado. Because again, like I said, the charges against me, I really have no evidence to back them up.
Sabrina de Sousa in Lisbon, thank you very much indeed for coming on Hard Talk.
Thank you.
This edition of Hard Talk was presented by me, Zainab Badawi. For details of our complete range of podcasts and our terms of use, go to bbcworldservice.com/podcasts.